Okay, good evening, everyone. This is Mollie Katz. I am a senior staff member with the Pulmonary Hypertension Association, and I want to thank you for dialing in this evening. We are just about to begin so that we can make the most of our roughly an hour together and leave time for questions at the end of the program. If you've called into the audio portion of the call but not the web portion, you'll want to go to readytalk.com and type in 565-3004 under Join a Meeting. So I'll be the host of today's event, and the presentation will be followed by a brief question and answer period. During the call, all of your lines will be muted. I think you heard that little command when I pressed the button. But if you have a question, feel free to submit it using the chat function on the web interface. You'll also have a chance to ask questions aloud by using the raise hand function on the web interface later in the call. And as a reminder, this webinar requires a web login as well as the audio call-in. If you're not yet logged into the web portion, you'll want to go to readytalk.com and again go to the 565-3004. Type that number in under Join a Meeting. And this call is being recorded, so eventually we will have it placed on the internet where it can be found in the future. I think it just takes about 24 to 48 hours to be available that way. At the conclusion of the webinar, please take a few moments to fill out the brief evaluation that will pop up in your internet browser once you've logged out of the webinar. Your feedback is really important to us, and we use it to shape our future PHA programs. So I am going to begin this webinar, which we're calling Recipe for a Successful Lantos Grant. And I want you to know that my role at PHA includes being the administrator of the Lantos Grant program. Now when I say administrator, that means that I just sort of help behind the scenes to coordinate things such as announcing the availability of the grant, helping to pull all the applications together, put them before the review committee, send out letters to the people who are selected for grants, etc. But I am not one of the people who helps to select which applications will be funded. So I just want to be very clear about that. I'm really more of the office person who just keeps this program going. And we'll talk a little bit more about the selection process as we go. So let's talk a little bit about what we'll cover in this webinar. I want to introduce you to the Tom Lantos Innovation and Community Service Awards program, just help you understand what that is and what it consists of. And then we can talk a little bit about how to hone your project ideas. I know sometimes at this point in the process people have an idea that might be a little bit unformed, and you're welcome to ask questions and tonight on the webinar, or also to continue to contact me or other people on our staff at PHA to help to develop your ideas further until you're ready to write them up and submit them. And I will talk to you about some of the ways the application process works so you'll be very familiar and understand how things will go. So let's begin by talking about why apply for a Lantos grant. Basically, the Lantos grants are designed to create opportunities for patients, families, caregivers, and others in the PH community to help each other to advance our cause in a variety of ways. Perhaps you see a need that hasn't been filled, and you have an idea for how to fill it and help your fellow PH patients, families, or caregivers. We want to give you the opportunity to make that happen. And we've noticed that people become very motivated very often to follow their ideas and to serve the PH community. And so we see these grants as an opportunity for you to make your mark and to really leave your stamp on the community by doing something good and productive. And we also want you to think about one of the components of this grant program, which is not just to take new original ideas and bring them forward. That's one part. But another important part is that we really would like to use some of these grants to replicate ideas that have already been successful. And so in that sense, it's not always essential to have something brand new to bring to the process. But if you look through some of the previous grants, or maybe if you look back to other programs that have been done in the PH community in the past, you may find inspiration and you may want to bring those to a new community, for example, a new geographic community, or you may want to bring them to a new pocket of people within the PH community, maybe a different age group, et cetera. So please think about replicating as well as creating something brand new. So some of the ways you might want to benefit the PH community, there's quite a variety of ways. Of course, all of us have noticed that having PH or being touched by a loved one's PH can cause a feeling of isolation because this is a rare disease. And many of the things that PHA does and many of the things that these grantees have done have helped to break down isolation by bringing people together, sharing ideas, bringing forward solutions that can be beneficial to lots of people, et cetera. Of course, we're always also trying to bring PH to the fore, let more people hear about it and understand it so that we can help other patients, we can help other families. Hopefully we help advance the cause of PH in general by having more people know what it is. Sometimes these projects have helped children and teens to cope with PH. They have some of their own needs at their various stages of life. And I know that even adults with PH often feel very passionate about not wanting to see children have to suffer with the impact of this disease the way the adults themselves have suffered. And so a number of our grantees in the past have chosen projects that reach that group of people. You may want to be pulling people together, rallying the local community behind PH, or you may be wanting to do something like reaching underserved populations, those that really haven't gotten as many services as they might need, such as non-English speakers. Other things you might want to try are reaching out to caregivers to give them support, et cetera. But this is open to your interpretation. Those are just some examples to get you started thinking. Now let me explain the funding of our program. This is the, I believe, 4th year of the Tom Lantos Grants. We receive funding fully for this program from Gilead, the pharmaceutical company. And Gilead provides money so that we can fund as many as 10 projects with a maximum of $5,000 for each one. Now when I say a maximum, some of the projects may ask for a $5,000 grant and may not quite receive it if the committee believes that perhaps some of the budget is not warranted. They may approve the concept but not give the full $5,000. And in other cases, people don't necessarily ask for $5,000. When they form their budgets, they may not feel that that's necessary, and so some of the grants are less than $5,000. As I said, the purpose of this grant is to enable increased awareness and to build new community services and to advance our cause in a variety of ways, and to extend the reach of the existing program, which goes back to that idea of replicating something that has been a strong idea in the past. Now we have a couple of new elements to the program this year that have to do with the application process and the action phase of the process. So in the action stage this year, one of the things we've provided for is a way to provide some extra assistance beyond the PHA staff only in the cases where this is needed. Some of the projects in the past have ended up requiring a little bit more assistance from our staff and others. And some of the kinds of assistance I mean might be things like writing copy, doing some kind of editing, helping to solve problems, helping to formulate ideas, et cetera. And so this year we have provided, through Gilead, to be able to work with outside consultants that will be chosen by PHA only in the cases where people really do need quite a bit more help. And these consultants will be chosen by us if we feel it's needed. Each one will work with a grantee only on a certain clearly defined list of goals. We'll be very clear when we go into that consulting relationship what should be delivered to the grantee. And those fees for the consultant will be paid by the Lantos Grant funder. We've been given a $20,000 fund, again, to be used as needed, but the maximum of $20,000 for the entire program. So that's one way that we may be getting things done this year if we think we need to. We also have a new element in the selection process. It used to be that you would submit your grant, your application, and the committee of 5 volunteers from the community would review it and rate it, and it would either be funded as submitted, or they might ask you a few questions and let you remake it. The idea this year can be funded as submitted again. It could be declined if the committee decides that it's not appropriate for a grant. But we're going to do a little bit more depth in the reworking part of things this year. So what you may find is that the committee reads your application, says, we're interested in funding this grant, but we want you to work with what we're calling a volunteer grant advisor, which will probably be a member of that selection committee. And together, you and the grant advisor will be able to walk through, iron out any wrinkles, solve any problems, plan things so they will run more smoothly and effectively, and then submit a revised proposal with that specific information that the committee wanted. And at that point, the revision will maybe accepted and you'll be ready to go. Now let's talk a little bit about what are some of the key ingredients in this recipe for a successful Lantos grant. The first thing you need to really focus on is, what need does my project address? You want to be very, very clear about what it is that you're trying to achieve. What goals do you have in order to make this project work? And then you need to think about the various steps and how you will get there. You want to think about whether the idea is something that could be replicated, since that's something that we want to go for in this program, is to be able to have ideas be extended again and again. And you want to be able to think about how much the project will cost, because you do need to help us figure out what the appropriate amount of grant money would be. So getting down to a little more specifics in those areas, some of the things you need to consider in order to make your grant application effective are what kind of community resources you might need. Some of these resources might be things like finding a place to hold an event if you wanted to have a special event, not a fundraiser special event, but maybe something to raise awareness, to bring people together, to learn, etc. You may need to figure out how you're going to communicate about what you're doing. And so that might be through media, that might be through social media, that might be through publishing something on your own, etc. But how you're going to get word out and how you're going to share information is something you should figure out early on. You also want to figure out things like if you're going to need sponsors to donate items. Maybe you're having a function and there is going to be food, or there are going to be prizes or some sort of thing like that, and you may need to have donations beyond this grant money that you've been given through the grant. And you want to be thinking about, if that's what's needed, who can I go to who might provide funding and be part of this event. You want to think about having a way of distributing anything that you produce. For example, we've had projects, I'll talk about one more later, that had to do with teddy bears for children, where they had a little backpack that was like the backpack that children use for their medication. These are wonderful ideas, and people really enjoy having these items, but you need to be thinking about, if you're going to create something like that, how will you get it to the intended audience of people? Are you going to ship it? If you're going to ship it, will there be costs involved? Will there be other steps that you need to take, etc.? You might want to think about what kind of help you can get from other people, and that might be paid help, like maybe using a graphic designer or someone who does video work, for example, and you would use some of your grant money to pay for their services. Or you might be looking for volunteer help as well. Maybe your friends and neighbors can help you in carrying out your grant. We had someone currently working on a grant who wanted to use her quilting skills to create quilts that would bring warmth and comfort to PH patients, and she involved people in her quilting club who also participated and helped to turn out enough quilts that made the project full. And you need to think about the time involved. Basically, we give you 1 year to work on your project, and of course we hope that you will budget your time out and figure out appropriate amounts of time that you will need, and figure out whether that really fits into your lifestyle and the other commitments that you have. So we want this to be a good experience. We want it to be a rewarding experience, and we don't want to create stress for you by having you involved in this grant. And there's a budget section of the application. And I do want to say a few words about budgeting, because really it sounds somewhat intimidating sometimes to think about submitting a budget for other people to review. But we're looking for something that's really very simple. Part of the role of the budget is just giving us another way to explain the project, the scope of it, where it's going to go, what the components of it are that will require funding. And so we suggest that you itemize all the costs. You might have to buy materials. You might have to buy services. You might have to think about the distribution, the shipping, the packaging, et cetera. But it's good to think about all of these things as you build your budget. And what I usually suggest to people is to kind of take some of the concern out of this budget process, is to think of the budget as almost like you would make if you were going on a vacation. And you need to figure out how much money are you going to spend on lodging? How much money are you going to spend on transportation? How much are you going to spend on food? How much are you going to spend on entertainment? And break it down so that if you're going to be gone for 5 nights, the lodging per night will be multiplied by 5, and that's your lodging budget line, and so forth. I'm sure that in many areas of your lives you've been using these types of skills. I don't know if you thought of them in terms of budgeting as we would do for this grant, but really we just want you to identify each segment of the project and figure out how much you think it will cost. And then we have you write down briefly what the goals and steps of the project will be. We call that the narrative. And so we want you to match your budget component to the narrative component so that you include the cost of everything that you have described in the written part. Make sure you read through that and pull out every item that will need a budget line. That's one way that you can ensure you've been complete in that area. Now let me make a note about physical activities. We have had in the past some proposals that included things like running or walking long distances, marathons, et cetera, that were designed to raise awareness. And we've had some difficulties with that because, of course, people who have PH may not really at every point be physically able to complete those kinds of challenges. And so we've decided that we're going to rule those out in the application process just because they have been sort of unreliable, and we don't recommend that people commit to doing that. But there are lots of other ways that we know that you all can come up with that will be creative and beneficial to the community. So we urge you to go in some other directions in that regard. So when you write up your plan, you may have seen on the PHA website that there is an online application form. And we're just going to ask us to tell us what need you will fill, the steps you will take. Tell us a little bit about your involvement with the PH community, whether you've done other volunteer work, whether you've been a mentor in some way, if you're involved in a support group, et cetera, or if you're new to the community as well. And we'd like you to give your project a name, sort of a title. One reason for that is that it helps you to summarize your thoughts about what is interesting and captivating about your project. Another reason is because when we submit the written applications to the committee, we take your names off of the application. And so we just give them the description, the budget, et cetera, and having your the name of the project at the top helps us to identify it and to discuss it and to rate it. The reason we take the names off of the applications is simply that we have a committee of 5 people from the community. Some of them may know those of you who are making the applications, and we want to make sure that the application is submitted blindly so that we don't have bias and we make our decision as fairly as we can. When you write the application, we want you to try very hard to be as clear as you can. Include any facts that you have that make your idea compelling or persuasive. We want you to show us how strongly you feel about the value of your project and your motivation for doing it, and that can be very convincing to the committee as well. And before you submit the written application, we suggest that you present it to someone to look at, someone you know who is not familiar with your project, who can just kind of give you some feedback in an objective way about whether or not you've been clear, whether or not you've been complete, whether they think your idea is truly workable, and some of those kinds of judgments. And then at that point, we would urge you to take what we call just a little bit of a reality check, and to just ask yourself as you go through what you've put together, is your project really doable? For example, do you have enough time to do it? Sometimes this is hard to judge depending on how your health may change and other circumstances may change that are unforeseen, of course. But think about if you're working, if you're taking care of a family, if you have other commitments in the community, and do you truly have the time to carry through on the commitment of doing the project? And are you physically able? Talked for a minute before about not committing to things that are really large physical challenges like the long walks or the long runs, but also that, do you think you will be able to have the energy to carry through on the type of project that you're doing? Some may be more physically demanding than others, but even so, only you can really judge your physical ability and whether or not this makes sense for you to commit. Think too about whether you have any other commitments already made to PHA. We've had people who are working on local special event fundraisers at the same time that they may have been thinking about doing a grant. We've had people who are support group leaders. We've had people who've served on different committees within PHA. And we don't want to overcommit you. Again, we want this to be a productive experience for you, something that you can enjoy, and not something that's going to add to your stress. So if you think that this might be one too many PHA commitments for you, it might be better to wait till another time when you may have more ability to concentrate on this grant. And we want you to think about how you're going to distribute any materials that you create. I think I mentioned that earlier, is that lots of people do want to create a video. They want to create a quilt. They want to perhaps make something that they publish. And that distribution mechanism is important to decide. And think about whether you can find access to everything you will need. Do you know people, for example, who might be in the graphics business who could do design for you? Or if you don't, could you figure out a way that you could use people in your personal network or in your community, for example, or do some research to find out where you might find services or products that you may need. Now, as you think about preparing an application and going through this process, you should know that February 27th is the deadline for applications, which will be submitted online through our website. In March, we will have the review committee meet. We are contractually obligated to have that meeting by the middle of March, and we will then announce the awards in April. Every applicant will receive a letter from us whether or not they were accepted for the grant. I'd like to tell you a little bit about projects that were funded in the past, just to give you a few ideas of how this has been done. We had a community member, Donna Catarini, who created what we call the Huff and Puff poster. And this is a design that was based on sort of the story of the three little pigs, which lent itself well to the whole huff and puff and breathing issue. And this poster was designed to promote a local support group, and multiple copies were provided to a number of support group leaders through our big national conference. And we had over 2,000 of these distributed all around the country. However, they have all been given away. We don't have them any longer. So if you're thinking in terms of replication, that's one concept that could be replicated. Another project that we had that was successful was the Bears with Backpacks, which I alluded to earlier. Kathy Grabner had this concept which came from a Build-A-Bear stuffed animal that was given to her daughter, Katie Grace, who has PH. And they found a backpack for the bear. They created a port as she used for her medication. And this became a way for her to talk to other people about her medicine, about her illness. They made a matching pack for the child, and it became something that was really a lot of fun and that helped her to connect with others, avoid embarrassment, and make this whole experience a little bit easier for her. Some of our projects just in 2012 included a performance and distribution of an original music video called Let Me Breathe. If any of you were at our conference in Orlando last summer, you were there when these video discs were distributed to everyone at conference. And we had a live performance by the gentleman who had written this song. He was related to a young woman who had PH. I believe he was her uncle. This is a Canadian man who came in touch with the PH community through support groups through his niece, and was inspired to write music because he was a professional in that field. And he had already created the video when he came to us for this grant. So that was not what the grant was for, but rather he wanted to share it at our international conference. And so he applied for funding so that he could make a large number of copies of the disc and then come down to Orlando from Canada and perform it for us. We had another one in the past year that was designed to raise awareness by placing brief awareness messages on coffee cup holders, those cardboard rings that are used to insulate a coffee cup at Starbucks, for example. And those were designed by a designer and printed up, distributed at coffee shops around the country. And we also had a similar project that was done with little tabletop signs to be used in restaurants to help raise awareness. I mentioned the quilting project, which included the quilted blankets, but also awareness buttons and keychains. And we have someone who is making an animated cartoon about pH for kids designed to really present the issues in sort of a child-friendly way, which is something that was thought to be a need that hadn't been filled. And we've had a number of international projects over the past few years as well that we're very proud of. We had a project in India this year, one in Korea, and one in Bulgaria. And I believe one of our callers tonight is actually from Bulgaria and thinking about going forward with another application. These grants were used to really form a pH community, because in many of these foreign countries, patients, families, caregivers, and professionals just haven't been organized the way they have been in the United States in the model of PHA. Some of the projects were designed to educate and support patients, and others were to provide materials that could help patients and professionals. Does anyone have a particular project that they are thinking of that you might want to ask a specific question about, or might want to have us help you shape that idea into sort of a ready phase for application?
Well, we're thinking about using the forum of the Minnesota State Fair, which is a huge event in Minnesota. I don't know, where you are tonight, but in Minnesota, it's something we call the great, the Minnesota get together, because everyone in the state comes to the state fair. Mm-hmm. And so, we would be asking for the money to help us develop, or to, develop a material to distribute, not necessarily flyers, but maybe something more visible. Mm-hmm. And cute, mm-hmm. that would put pH in front of people. So that's our idea. That's where. So we've got the distribution down. Mm-hmm. We probably have to. We're just starting to look at materials that that would be affordable, because we're talking about 100,000 people a day come to the Minnesota State Fair. Mm-hmm. 100,000 a day. That's a lot of people.
Right. And so were you envisioning that you would be sort of wandering among the crowds, or how did you have that kind of distribution point figured out, if you have figured it out?
But we would be,
we would be having a booth.
Yeah,
okay.
Right.
The cost of the booth is per square foot, I think it's about a $700 for a 7x10 booth, which would probably be the smallest. But people would walk by our booth, and we would distribute the material from the booth.
Okay, and so that would be part of your budget. And then, of course, developing whatever kind of material that you distribute would be part of your budget.
Right.
Have you thought at all about what it is that you specifically would want to convey in these materials? What would you want people to sort of understand more of when they walked away from seeing you at the booth?
I've talked to Elizabeth Williams of the awareness campaign at PHA, and our thought was, again, raising awareness of the disease for the general public. The other opportunity is people from outstate Minnesota come to the state fair, not just the metropolitan areas. Mm-hmm. So we thought listing of the symptoms, what is pH, and something of the zebra campaign. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's pH, those kinds of things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that would lend itself well, the concept of sometimes it's pH, because that gets us to the notion that there may be people who have pH who think they have another illness right now, or have literally been told by physicians that they have another illness, and that's an area where I think we can find more people who really need treatment and get that important care to them by helping them to understand if they may be at risk.
Yeah. And my sister and I, Margie, on the other line, Mallory's aunt, we lost our daughter, her niece, to pH due to misdiagnosis.
Oh, I see.
And so it's very dear to our hearts, and we can be very passionate about that issue.
Right, of course you do. I'm sure that was a very difficult experience, but this is one of the reasons why we have something like the Lantos program, is to give all of you in the community a chance to take action around some of these feelings and concerns and desire to help others out of the difficulty that you've experienced. So.
Well, and I think particularly when I did write this grant once and then kind of lost it, because I forgot to save it.
Oh.
But when I did my rough copy, I'm going to have to kind of resurrect. But I think that the things that came to mind to me were, number one, I think in the state fair venue, you have this cross section of ages, and I think one of the issues I would see is, in communicating about pulmonary hypertension is that we need to reach young people, and I think very often health venues, are attractive to old people, not the state fair. I mean, I think that here's a place where we would be able, I think, to to kind of catch the attention of some younger folks.
Right. And when you say younger, are you thinking of young adults? Are you thinking of children or teens?
I'm thinking of young adults. I'm thinking about, in particular, I'm thinking about my niece who was 32 years old, and the things that presented themselves, what it looks like, and I think it's just being able to reach that population.
Right.
I think that would be part of our effort.
Right. Now, let me ask you this. At the state fair with these booths, I imagine that there's a big section that has booths for different purposes. Is there necessarily a health component to that, or is everything just sort of mixed together?
I'm the one that was responsible, and I've submitted the application. We hope to get into the health science and the health. They do have health buildings.
Okay, good.
So we hope to get in there. But they also are around in other places. But people go specifically to go through these areas, like the grandstand building, to specifically talk about the institutions and services. So
and
wherever they put us, I think it would be good.
I think having the health building would really be an advantage to you, because that would put people sort of in the right frame of mind when they come through. If you were mixed with, people who were doing business or people who were doing other kinds of things, it might be harder to really get their attention. But I think in that setting, that would work much more easily for you. The other thing that I would caution you about when you want to communicate about pH to a broad general audience, I mean, of course, being a rare disease, most people who may have something that seems like it could be pH probably don't have it, just because of our numbers being small. Nevertheless, people need to know what this is so that those cases where it is pH can really get the proper attention and treatment. So I would caution you, as I did with this project with the coffee cup holders, is that you're going to be communicating with a population of people who are not necessarily in the deep struggle of the people who are facing pH daily. So they may not be used to, shortness of breath all the time. They may have it once in a while, or they may not really be striking them quite, how difficult things are getting. You want to be raising awareness for them, but you don't necessarily want to be putting out all the scariest things right out there. You want to give them some kind of warning signs that can draw them in, so that if they have concerns, they can come, for example, to PHA or someplace else and get more information. There have been times when I've seen situations where I think it's very difficult for people in a broad audience to connect with pH, because those of us inside the community are so familiar with some of those really dramatic and difficult things. We're used to talking about them, and we're used to dealing with them among ourselves. But we need to realize that people who don't face that every day could be very shocked or frightened, and maybe even kind of turned away from this topic because of that. So you want to present it in a way that's kind of gentle enough for them to see, that there are risks and you need to know more.
Yeah.
So do we have some other projects that people might want to be asking about, or other specific questions you're thinking about that you may be uncertain about in your applications, or at least the formation of your ideas for those applications? Has anyone looked through some of the other concepts where we have on our website sort of the listings of each year's grantees and projects? That's a good way to kind of get a sense of some of the directions that people have gone that have been successful. Is anyone thinking of creating a product, a video, a written product, a program, a website? Because I'd be happy to help in developing out some of those ideas about how that might get done or what it might consist of. Is there anything that anyone might want to mention where you feel a little bit less strong right now in planning your grant? Sometimes just talking it through can help you to gather a bit of confidence to take a few steps further.
I have one specific question about the grant
Sure.
application. Typically, when I've written grants in the past for other things, there is a place where it asks you specifically to describe your project.
Yeah.
And this grant, would you find that going under describe your plans for carrying it out?
Well, I think there's one even before you get to the plans that's a little bit broader. That's sort of about what need would you fill, or what would you be trying to achieve with your grant.
Okay.
I don't have the application right in front of me to be perfectly specific about that, but I think that it is structured in that way. So before you describe your steps, you're going to describe broadly what's the direction.
Right. Yes, you describe your purpose, then the need, then
Right.
the goals,
Right.
and then you describe your plans for carrying it out.
Exactly. And then the final thing is just the budget.
Okay. Yes. Okay.
Yeah, and it's a brief process. We don't expect, reams of written material. A very straightforward presentation is fine. Just, as I said, try to be very clear. Try to include what you need to include without going into excessive, explanation or background. If you have something that's kind of a scene setter that helps to explain the context of your project, that's certainly fine. Going back to that coffee cup holder project again, one of the things that they told us last year was that they had done some research and they discovered that the average person who goes to like a Starbucks or the equivalent of a Starbucks will spend an average of 20 minutes with their coffee cup. And there was some kind of statistic about how many people see, what's written on the cup. And so that was, just one or two sentences of background, but it helped to sort of give the idea that, there was a reason to do this. There was some explanation of how far it could reach and why it would be noticed and that sort of thing. So that kind of addition can help us, but it doesn't have to be anything, deep or extensive. We do encourage you to use these weeks leading up to the deadline also to go ahead and contact anyone on our staff. We are happy to talk with you. This is not a process where we, are very strict that you can't be in contact with us or anything of that nature. We're glad to talk things over. We want to give you the best possible opportunity to get one of these grants. And so if there's a broad question that you have or even a very detailed question, you may have figured out a lot of things, but there may be one or two elements that are you're still struggling with. And we are happy to help you in that regard. You may end up talking to more than one of us, and that all is a very welcome contact in this process. So you can talk to me or you can talk to other people that you may know or have worked with at PHA. Well, if we do have more questions or comments, I'd be happy to take those. If not, I think we might be ready to wrap up. And just a reminder that we do have a little survey for you to do. It's very, very brief, and that will come up on the screen as we finish. And we hope that you will take the time to fill out the survey because it really does help us to figure out how we can go forward more successfully to help you out. So I will open the floor one more time if anyone would like to share a comment or question. Okay, well, thank you very much for joining us this evening. I encourage you all to explore your ideas and to send in your applications for this project.